the minute that ChatGPT launched. Very, very quickly, I was one of those that said that this is a game changer, especially when it comes to writing.
Welcome to the show. This is the Bot Brothers AI for Educators. I'm Mike Pearson.
And I'm Pat Burns.
Today, we already, before we started rolling the show, we already started a conversation with Peter Paccone, who's another teacher, and we've had a couple of conversations already that just keep on going. So we think you're in for something special, especially if you're an educator and you teach at the AP classes. Peter is a veteran social studies teacher. He's more a veteran than Pat and I thought we were pretty veteran. He's got over 30 years at San Marino High School in California. Again, Pat, we've got more and more West Coast love than any other place, I think, in the United States on this show. He's a self-professed evangelist of College Board and AP Classroom. He's most recently selected to be on the College Board's AI and AP Advisory Committee. And most recently, he started a position with Class Companion, which is an AI program that assists students by giving feedback on written assignments. And I know there's more to you, Peter, but if you teach AP out there, if you teach AP APUSH or AP Euro, I'm assuming, or AP Lang or AP Lit, there has been a shift in the rubric over the past, I don't know how many years, 6 years, 5 years? And there's a point called the sophistication point for AP Lang and AP Lit. And Peter was just kind of talking about that point. And I hate to ask you to restate it, Peter, but I think people would like to hear this that are in that area.
Well, the sophistication point in AP Lang, the only way I can speak to that is that it's similar in terms of the complexity point in APUSH, AP World, and AP Euro. It's also similar in the sense that, at least in the social studies, less than 5% earn it annually, and I think it's about the same number in Lang and Lit. I'm not a fan of the complexity point as either it was being interpreted in the reading room in May, or as the rubric itself was worded. And for 2 years, going over 2 years, I've been calling for a change to the complexity point rubric. So specifically as it relates to AP, APUSH, World, and Lang. Yes, I very much want to see also a revision of the Lit and Lang sophistication point rubric. But let me stay focused, if I could, on the complexity point. What was my problem with it? Well, if less than 5% are earning the point, what are we measuring? Are we measuring the ability of students to write well, or are we measuring their ability to think in a complex manner? Complex manner thinking, in my opinion, can be expressed in simple prose. I don't need to sound like I've been born with the language and had the benefit of great writing teachers my entire life in order to show complex thinking. So that was my argument. Let's either score it differently in the reading room, or better yet, let's change the rubric so that we can recognize a demonstration of complex thought. And the big problem was, initially, it had always been maintained, I think wrongly, that the complexity point, to show that you're writing a complex argument, you need to weave it in throughout the essay, here, there, back, for nuanced, as opposed to being able to make an argument and then simply at the very end, in a standalone paragraph, modify or qualify the argument. I believe that's a demonstration of complex thinking, especially in a timed writing, high stakes kind of testing situation. And College Board has responded. That's exactly what has happened now. There's no mistake about it. They've made it very, very clear, and they're going to make it even more clear. There's videos on it. It made its way into the reader's report. I'm sure more will come. We'll see if it increases that 5% here, or if it's going to take a little bit of time. But I just believe that there are way more kids in the world who can think about this subject matter in a complex fashion, but don't possess the writing skills to express it that way.
Yeah, let me, for people listening that may have not been in an AP class in a long time, or non-educators, for at least for AP Lang and AP Lit, there's a 6-point rubric, and you get a point for having a thesis that's arguable. And you get 4 points, up to 4 points, for what they call the evidence and commentary. So it's the evidence that you select, how good that evidence is, and then the commentary is what you say about that evidence. And the point that Peter you're talking about is sophistication, or in history it was complexity. Was that what it
Correct.
was?
That's right. Yeah.
So they call it a
Like how
complexity
you've
point. We
explained
call
that.
it
That's nice. Yeah.
and I think it's interesting that you said that complexity can be shown. You can have complex thoughts in simple language, but what the history courses are doing is like it has to be woven through it to be a good writer, and that makes sense. Like you can have complex thoughts in any language, right? Even if you're just learning English, I think for the AP Lang and AP Lit people, part of that point, the sophistication point, is are you a sophisticated writer?
Mm.
And
It
the
might
weird
be.
part is that I mean, there's plenty of writers that are sophisticated that use simple language, right, and simple sentence structures. But what tends to get rewarded is really kind of like almost like poetic type writing. And then for the argument stuff or the rhetorical analysis stuff for AP Lang, it's really just having the kind of the contextual knowledge of like maybe you knew about Ronald Reagan and his politics, and then when you analyze his speech, you're able to kind of talk about that. I'm going to go one more step further. That Peter, if what you're saying is right, if there can just be a paragraph that kind of shows a counter or a rebuttal, like for AP Lang teachers, this can be super simple because we just show them like classical argument structure where it's embedded in, right? And then there's your sophistication, which is what ACT used to do years ago. It's like if you could do that structure, you would immediately get a higher score. But that brings me to a larger point that I think is this what this show is about is should there even be a sophistication point with if you can generate writing with AI?
Well, we went there, didn't we?
We did go there.
Yeah. So, you're asking me, with AI, do I believe that in a course that I don't teach, Lang or Lit, that students should be rewarded for the sophistication point?
Or even the complexity point.
Yeah.
Yeah, think of it just within your domain. How do you see that working or not?
The minute that ChatGPT launched, very, very quickly, I was one of those that said that this is a game changer.
Yep.
Especially when it comes to writing.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I hate to use this phrase, but not that we're going to throw out the baby with the bathwater here.
Right.
But room needs to be made. Room needs to be made for assessing students differently. And I believe one of the reasons the College Board reached out to me, and I'm certain of it, one of the reasons they reached out to me is because I blogged and I spoke a lot, blogging and speaking a lot about this change. My personal opinion is that we're going to have to decrease the emphasis that we place on the writing, on the production of the product, because it can be done by AI. And to think that it can't, I just don't believe in the AI detectors.
No, they don't work.
Yeah. You believe that, right?
They do not work. Oh my gosh.
Peter, one perfect example. I actually used Mike and I had talked about this before, but I had a ChatGPT 4 make an essay, and I just did a standard sort of thing. I said, include Gatsby, have it be about the American dream, pretty basic stuff. And it kicked out an essay, and I sent it through one of these detectors, and it said the entire thing was written by a human, 100%.
Wow.
And it was one of these ones that, I mean, it was, I'm not gonna say which one, but it was one that's been touted in the New York Times. And I'm like, this is nonsense. I'm like, I literally cannot trust it because it's it can be so incredibly wrong.
Yeah.
That I don't want to bust a kid for plagiarizing when maybe he didn't. That's a serious problem, So
yeah, I got a parallel story that last spring, like my AP kids, we were full on using every AI thing we could get our hands on. Chat GPT wasn't blocked when we were trying to see what we could do with them. And so I told kids, I'm like, go ahead and use Chat GPT, but then can you go through your essay and mark what is you and what is not you? And our discussion was real intelligence, RI versus AI, right? And so some kids quickly figured out that at that time that they could do better writing more efficiently than having Chat GPT do it. And other kids like really enjoyed trying to see what the program could do. But one student in particular, there was no penalty for using AI. And so he on a Google Doc, he commented throughout his essay, this is me, this is all AI, this is a mix. So I could see what he was doing. And then the AI detectors came out and I ran it through one of them and it flagged a bunch of stuff. And I looked at it and I looked at his commentary and it was different. And so I had the kid come in. I was like, "You're not in trouble. Like, come, like, check this out, right?" And we both looked at it, and he was like, "Well, that's not right because this is the part that was GPT." As he knew, I'm like, and I go, "So what do you make of this?" He goes, "Well, that's not very useful, is it?"
Mm.
I said, "No, it's not."
Well.
Yes.
So I'm tempted to. I can finish off my thought, but I'm tempted to ask: as you guys as English teachers, are how are you dealing with it? I mean, is it all being handwritten in class? Are you are
Nope.
not assigning any work that they can use the AI for?
I imagine we
Um,
have different answers. I'll let Mike go first on that one, though.
yeah, I've got so last year with the AP kids, we just jumped in and we just played with it. Like we made it was fun because we got done with like all of the novels and stuff. And I'm one of the rare AP Lang teachers that does novels. I do fiction because you can. I've been teaching AP Lang. It doesn't really matter. Um, but they did all this stuff. The second semester is like all argument where they were generating different characters from different stories meeting up like through social media. So they were using like fake Instagram generators and fake Twitter feeds and making videos and this whole project that they were having to take the thematic ideas and push the characters against each other. So that was a blast. And then this year, I traditionally have my AP Lang kids write satire because they seem easy, but they're wicked hard. And this year I'm like, man, Chat GPT can do these things. And so I opened it up and I said, you can use any tool. I gave him a list of every possible tool out there. And then part of it is like and I started thinking about, I went back, looked at the Common Core standards, and I was like, maybe we're not doing the writing stuff so much. Maybe we're just doing the production of writing. I looked at that standard and that didn't fit. And then I thought, well, what happens if a kid just has Chat GPT make a satire? They still have to decide how good it is,
Yeah.
right? They have to determine its output and they have to tweak it. And so I was like, you can use Chat GPT and you can have it write a satire. But then the second component is that they have to explain to me what they learned.
Exactly.
Right. So like
Yeah.
I gave them a prompt. So it's a two-part thing. They get like, half the credit is for how good the satire is. And it can be a video, it can be an ad, it can be an onion piece, it can be like a modest proposal, like whatever they want. And then they have to turn around and explain to me, in bullet points, so real fast, here's what I learned. And what that stops is like the student that just does a 10-second prompt and hands it in because what did you learn?
Mm.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Right. And then it also allows the kids to experiment. So I'm handling it that way. And then with my sophomores and that class, they have to, I've been talking to them about how all these kids are getting accused of using AI. And I go, you are now probably in a world for the next 5 years until you graduate from college, where the burden of proof is on you to prove that you did your stuff. So I give them a Google Doc, they make a copy of it with the directions in it,
Mm.
and then they do their entire essay in that Google Doc, and I have editing rights. So I go, so I can see your revision history, and then we can use draft back. I can see you type it if we have to. And then they have to start one Chat GPT thread for the assignment so they can share the entire thread. I'm not going to look at all this stuff. And then they have to do like a AI resource, like kind of like that footnotes sometimes are dependent on the class. And really, I tell them it's because, and you should just get in this habit because if some professor or teacher, accuses you, you can say, here is everything I did.
Yeah.
Here's how I produced this thing. So that's how I'm handling it. And then the kids are kind of responding to that well. And then Pat, you want to go ahead with what you're doing?
Oh, I just play movies all day. That's all that I do. No. Well, what Mike's talking about, I love actually kind of the approach in terms of like really emphasizing process, and Mike has his own approach to that to kind of verifying that. And for me, it's not necessarily specifically with AP Lang, but it's just with all my courses. And I guess I'll use my senior. I have a senior rhetoric course, and we were just recently wrapping up a persuasive research essay. And in the past, I mean, I've had my checkpoints and have people or students turn things in on with certain deadlines, what have you, to kind of guide them along the way. And I've always liked that assignment because it just kind of it shows them how to go through the research process and develop drafts and revisions and what have you, and synthesize materials and what have you. But I think the big shift for me this year, knowing that AI is out there, is letting them use it. So if they wanted to use it for getting ideas, brainstorm ideas, but also even helping with like outlining, just giving a skeleton, that's fine. But I wanted to basically focus on grading their process. So it's not that the product doesn't, their final paper doesn't have value. It does. I'm not trying to strip that away entirely. There's got to be some value to it, or else I think they just won't buy in as much. But I'm really reinforcing the idea of saying, well, along the way, let's look at these steps. Let's think about like how you're going about generating this information. And I don't go to the extent that Mike does, although I like the way he's approaching things, because I think that that level of I guess attention to that process is probably needed on some level. But I really want to give value to, and give credit for the steps along the way, and let those be just as important, if not even more so, than the actual end product. And it's taking some time for the students to or has taken some time for the students to wrap their heads around that, because I think just by virtue of just our system,
Yes.
students are always focused on the grade. And I'm like, well, that's all fine and well, but I know that you talk to most teachers, and the grade, we generally don't care, or at least in our school, the teachers I've talked to generally don't care so much about what the student's grade is. They're more interested in like, well, do you understand how to get from A to B, right? Or A to Z? And can you demonstrate that? Because that's going to be much more important for you long term than any individual grade that I might, that you might quote unquote earn. So for me, it's all about process and trying to build assignments where I can evaluate that more than anything else. So
I'm in the same kind of place. I mean, in APUSH, I've got to teach them how to write for the test, okay? But when it comes to work, additional kind of work, I'm going to be grading them on their ability to answer questions as it relates to whatever they've produced. I mean, if it is a paper, I'm going to de-emphasize the grade that I place on the paper, because I know that the paper has in large part been produced with the help of AI, and I'm not sure how to grade that anyway. But I do want them to be able to answer what I call logically anticipatable questions that flow from that paper. I want them to demonstrate to me that they know the content that they're putting forth in the paper, and can answer any other logical question that comes from that paper. If their paper is on, say, for example, the effect of the Spanish mission system on the Native Americans who live 22 miles off the California coast on Catalina Island. If that's their paper, and they say to me in the paper, hey, they use the abalone, and they leave it at that, well, then I'm going to ask them, one of the most logical questions in the world is, what did they use the abalone for? And the minute they give me that question, well, okay, there's got to be a logical question that flows from that. Let me ask you that, and to see how far they took that down the line. To what extent did they really understand what they're putting forward in the paper?
Do you ask a more basic question too, like what is an abalone? I don't even know.
How about, yeah, I'm sure that's a great, absolutely.
I'm like thinking, like, do I need to look that up? Yeah. I feel stupid all of a sudden.
In fact, I'm playing around a little bit. I mean, imagine if a AI could produce those questions and could give you an entire bank of questions that then could give the student with a lockdown browser in a testing like situation. So now we can also measure their ability to express that in writing.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that quite a bit, because there's like the personalized GPTs that I've written a bunch of those, but I can't do anything with them because the kids don't have the paid version.
Right.
And then Pat and I both use, we had a founder on the show, Eric Keene, that does my essay feedback, where you can, it's a system that the kids submit their work. It's all privacy protected. And then you can build the prompt. And so the kids get very specific feedback. And so you can kind of put your brain into a prompt, and then it gives its feedback. And so I keep on thinking, like what you said, Peter, is like at some point there's going to be a lockdown, something or other, where we're going to attempt to try to figure out what do you actually know, right? And then with some of the AP kids, like the GPTs, and even just using them learning how to prompt chat GPT, like you can become a better writer by having it tutor you.
Absolutely.
But at some point you got to show us that you can do it, and I don't want to be like, let's write this by hand. But, I had a junior this year that we were using my essay feedback, and they gave her a suggestion for, I think I wrote a prompt that was going to work on their syntax and style and using em dashes and different types of sentences. And so it said it offered one up because she asked it, and she put it in her paper, and this was her struggle. She's like, it's good, it works, but I don't know if it works better than what I had.
Hmm.
And I was like, that is a great question.
Let me respond to that by saying this. First of all, what you just described, the creation of a GBT that your students can't use because they don't have the paid version. So are you both members of ChatGPT for Teachers, the Facebook group, by any chance?
Maybe I joined a bunch of groups.
There's
Yeah.
a bunch of them there. Chat. Wait, hold on. Actually, I think we are. Yeah, ChatGPT for Teachers. Yeah, we're in there. Yep.
Okay.
Really.
So I'm a member, and I post there a lot, and I comment there a lot. It's so funny you should mention that, because I just had my science teacher come in here an hour ago
Mhm.
and say, hey, I've got this problem. I created this thing. My kids can't use it. Do you know of a workaround? And I said, no, I don't. I've been thinking about it. But I tell you what, if I have your permission, I'll put it up on the page tonight. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to see if some of those really bright guys up there, you'll recognize their names, if they can help us figure out how we can work this problem, so to speak. That was going to be the
if
first
the
thing.
school districts will buy an enterprise license, that's a big if.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Then we're in, and then you have the disparity between like the affluent districts that buy the
Right.
enterprise license, and
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but to Mike's point, that particular I guess app, if you will, is incredibly useful because it does guide students, and you can set it up so you can force it to ask follow-up questions to the students. You can ask it to make the students create a revision plan.
Yep.
And it really so it works like a tutor, a writing tutor might, right? But I think that and I think Mike and I were talking about this the other day. There's always going to be the issue of like, that's all fine and well for the students who are going to buy in and try to actually like work it. But then what do you do about motivation? How do you encourage students to actually want to use it and then use it effectively and just to care in the first place? That's a whole nother conversation. But AI obviously doesn't necessarily solve that for a good number of students. So that's still a nut to crack somehow.
Well, let's go this way with it. Have either one of you tried writing a book or a play or some significant with ChatGPT?
Yeah. So what I did last semester in May, I realized I was going to have about 2 to 3 weeks to kind of play with my regular junior level English course. And because we were wrapping up stuff just a little sooner than I anticipated. But I went ahead and I tested this myself, and I asked it. This was working off of, actually, I think I was working off of ChatGPT 3.5, because even though I had 4, I knew my students would only have access to 3. So I went ahead and just asked it to write a play, like a 5-act play. And I gave it some parameters. I said, we'll put it in Chicago and include some of these other details. And I had that prompt, and it kicked it out, but it only put out so much because of just the tokens, what have you. So, and so I just asked it to break it down by act. I said, well, write me the first act. And it did that. And I said, okay, write me the second. And I just cobbled it together. And I had a play. And it worked. It was okay. It was cliche, but some of the dialogue was pretty decent. And in terms of, I think its style and its voice was actually pretty decent. What I then had students do is I used that as a model for the students, and then I had the students go in and do it themselves on their own terms. And there were parameters that were kind of tied to things that we covered like thematically in class. And then they had to actually then perform them. Or actually they had to have ChatGPT write it, and they had to adjust or tweak it as necessary, and then they had to perform it. And what they all said was similar to what I was just saying, which is like, they said, well, it's okay, but they wanted to have more time to try to adjust it and re-edit or revise it, which I thought was fair because it was somewhat rudimentary. I bet 4 could do a little bit better, but even still, and there's some nuance and maybe just some voice that's kind of lost because it's just obviously kind of working on probabilities, but it wasn't bad at all. It wasn't terrible. It just wasn't particularly jaw dropping, or I mean, it wasn't Hamilton, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But then again, here a few things are, and if we're thinking about what high school students tend to produce, I'm like, it's kind of on par, to be honest. I looked at my old poems from when I was in high school. I'm like, that's what I wrote. And I thought I was brilliant. Like, no, it's fine. So, but yeah, it's workable. Why do you ask?
Well, because we were kind of talking about motivation in students to go back to what you were mentioning. And the one thing that I have found is both in myself and with my students, I've been contracted to produce 2 handbooks and also a book, the book to be published before the election. And I use ChatGPT a lot. But what I find is, say for a chapter, I'm going to write this chapter with the help of ChatGPT, and it's never going to give me exactly what I want.
Mhm.
And so I take it out, I put it into a Google Doc, and I move it back and forth, and I can go bring it back to ChatGPT. It's endless. I mean, iterations, right? That's what they call it, iterations. And then 5 or 6. I would tell everybody it's at least 5 or 6 iterations, oftentimes many, many more than that, before I get something that I say I'm okay with this. So really, I mean, it's a collaboration, but for some reason that hooks me. That process hooks me. And what I find with students is it seems to hook them as well once they get that idea of, don't just take it at face value. The phrase I use that Holly Clark, do you guys know Holly Clark by any chance? The keynote speaker. Oh, I got somebody for you. Yeah.
Awesome.
Southern California educator, world acclaimed educational keynote speaker, Holly Clark. She heard me say,
Holly Clark.
Holly
Sure,
Clark.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm still gonna be like, I have no
You
idea.
were thinking the other
Nice.
Holly Clark, and I didn't. Sorry, I should have made it clear to these gentlemen. But the phrase I use is prompting and pasting is pathetic. I mean, don't think that that's what it's here for. Prompt, paste, iterate, and then go back and forth. And there's a motivate. It motivates me. It makes me want to keep working. So I was wondering if it's had the same effect on you guys.
You know, I think that
Yeah.
I think so. I think part of it is we were actually talking to a designer about this because I was trying to wrap my head around like the way that Chat GPT outputs is that it makes you wait and then it types real fast, right? And so you're kind of like you're kind of getting hooked, right? You wanted to see what it's going to say, and then that's not quite what I want. You prompt it again, so you kind of get in that loop. Where I think Bard, I don't know what it's doing now. I haven't looked at it recently, but like it would just like spit out 3 things at once, right? And then the hook wasn't there so much. And so I know for me, like when I'm trying to like write the GPTs or write a prompt, like I get hooked in to trying to, what I've learned, what I'm doing is I'm writing an algorithm, right? Like that's what programmers do, is that you through coding is that you code and then you see what the output is. And then if it doesn't work, you go back and debug. Right. And so, I've been trying to learn Python, so I'm learning about coding.
Cool.
But so when you prompt, you're actually writing a code for the train to tell the LLM what to do. So and that's just an algorithm, a set of directions. And so I get hooked into trying to get the right output. And so it's like an intellectual thing for me.
Yeah.
And then the GPTs came out and I started writing those because I was like, these are great. But so this is a long answer to your question. I think some kids get hooked into that iteration and looping and kind of get sucked in, just like you get sucked in on the internet years ago. But I think pretty soon there's going to be a GPT that will do that for you. Well, that's going to have all the embedded iterations. And then you'll just buy that at the app store for 99 cents. And it's going to be like history GPT or whatever thing, right? And so like the prompt engineering thing, I just don't know how long it's going to last. And Pat's heard me say this before. Is I've been playing music since I was 14, and I've watched the technology change until you can literally push some buttons on your phone and make a song that is the song for this podcast that took 10 minutes. You know, and I'm just like, I think writing is probably going in that direction where you're just gonna like click some buttons and it's gonna go whoop, and you're gonna kind of mix your writing.
Well, and I think that
Pat doesn't agree, but this is
no, I
just
don't. Well, I do and I don't. Let me qualify it because I'm a name healing teacher. But more importantly, I think that there's going to be room for that. I think there's going to be space for that. I'm just not convinced that that's an either or proposition. So
okay,
for me, it's more a matter of I like starting with Chat GPT in certain cases just to kind of see what it'll give me, and it's fun. I think it's intellectually interesting, and if not, at least for brainstorming, I find it kind of fascinating, and it can lead me down some interesting sort of kind of rabbit holes, if you will, or just directions. But at the end of the day, when it comes to whether it's an essay or whether it's a poem or what have you, I just like writing my own stuff, and part of that might be by virtue of just that I was born and raised in a world where this wasn't a thing, and I've just kind of cultivated that process for myself, and that's what I prefer. But so it might be that, but I think for me, it's a matter of, I think that there are enough people out there who ultimately just want to be able to kind of better establish their own sense of voice. And so while yes, there might be programs that you can click, and press something and it'll create something, and that can be awesome and great in its own right. I think there are going to be just as many people. Well, I'm not going to play numbers, but like there will be an audience, right, who will want to just say, "Oh, that's all fine and well, but I'm still going to do it this other way." I think it's no different to draw parallels between, like, say, perhaps people who prefer listening to books on audio or reading the actual physical book, right? Or somebody who likes to listen to vinyl as opposed to a CD, or their iTunes, and their earbuds, whatever, or digital.
Playing drums or making beats.
Yeah, I think that I think that both can be true, and
Right.
I'm fine with that. I don't mind that so much, but it does complicate our job as teachers, unless, of course, I think we always come back to, like, well, here, what we're doing here is we're talking about process, and we can determine or set parameters for what that process is going to look like in this context, in this particular space, and understand it might change in a different classroom in a different year with a different teacher. That's all fine and well, but I think that's where the teachers are going to have to figure out what's going to make sense, or maybe, I guess, departments, what's going to make sense for them, because I think there's space for all of it, but I imagine some guidelines or guardrails will have to be put in place. It can't just be like a free for all. That's not going to fly either. But I think there might be some sort of middle ground, or at least an acknowledgement of, like, well, if you're going to do an assignment, maybe you take the Pearson approach and you play with these buttons and you boom, 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 you create whatever, and then maybe take a different approach and say, you know what, I'm going to go more old school with this, and here's how I'm going to generate it.
Yeah, you do digital writing or you do clay.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So,
Digital photography or
Yeah.
like film photography, right?
yeah, yeah.
College Board tried to create that kind of middle ground in the AP seminar and the AP African American Studies this year. That's the committee that I was on.
Mhm.
My position was a little bit more extreme, right? And I knew they were going to back up. That's okay. This year, first year out, it only goes so far that you can use the AI, and the teacher, if you will, is the gatekeeper.
Mhm.
With teachers having some flexibility into how they're interpreting these rules. What will happen next year is a very interesting question. Um, if you're going to crack the door open in an AP seminar, in AP African American Studies, are we going to go into next year and not have it cracked open in any other classes?
Right.
Well, I mean, certainly that's not something that I'm calling for. And if we're going to crack it open in other classes, what might that look like? And I mean, to go back to my story of the effect of the Spanish mission system on the Native Americans on Catalina Island. I mean, imagine a history class, and there's some carryover here to the Lang and the Lit class. Imagine if College Board comes out at the beginning of the year and it says, hey, we've got 3 different things, 4 or 5 different topics that you can write on, and this is one of them. And we're looking at 15-page, 20-page, I don't know, give me some number, it doesn't matter. Paper, research paper, traditional research paper, and you produce the paper. We don't even need College Board. Imagine if I just were to do that in my own class,
Mhm.
and then question the students on the paper at the end, question them to see the extent to which they can answer those logically anticipatable
Well,
questions and score that
Wouldn't
predominantly.
that then almost sound, correct me if I'm
Right.
wrong, similar to what you might find when you're defending a dissertation?
Exactly. That's very much yes.
Yeah, there's just always the time factor thing, right? Like they do
Mhm.
this big, well, it may not be a big process if you can leverage AI, like the process of creating the production of the text can go
Yes.
very fast.
hmm
Now,
Mhm.
but the thing is when you produce a text and you have to write it, you tend to know it,
hmm
right? So then
hmm
if you're leveraging all the tools to put stuff together, then yeah, so like can you answer the questions at the end? And it's
hmm
almost like, and I was thinking about this even with the satire thing, like the questions where I'm asking kids, like, tell me what you learned. You could probably have GPT create something that would sound reasonable about what you learned. So you're back to that same problem, is like, how do I know exactly what you know?
hmm
You know?
You're Yeah. And imagine an AI where that could be done orally. with where the AI is asking those questions, and based on the student's answer, is able to kick it up a notch or not. I mean,
Right.
in the hypothetical, these cannot be far down the road. I mean,
Right.
we're here already now.
But it's interesting because you mentioned orally. I mean, and then you run into issues of like students who maybe have been acculturated to speak, in ways that are maybe a little bit more sophisticated, right,
Right.
than
Yeah.
others. And then you're gonna have, equity issues there. Now, I'm not saying I don't know what you do about that, but because we obviously have plenty of spaces where there are massive inequities going on. It seems to me that AI doesn't necessarily um, create those problems; it just exacerbates them, the
Right.
existing ones that are there. And
Yeah.
I think that's an important point to acknowledge, like, to what extent is that okay or not okay, especially the public school system, but
In high school, I mean, it almost sounds unbelievable the comfort level I have here now, but I suffered from major social phobia. And the idea of coming on a camera like this, that cameras in particular, there was just something about that.
Mm.
Today, there's not even a double clutching for a second, but I taught psych for 25 years, and I now know, that there's a certain number of the population that has a legitimate fear of this sort of thing. But these are all things still to be worked out. I think bottom line, I think what we're looking at though is less of an emphasis on the product itself, less assessment on the product itself, and more on assessing students' ability to defend or answer questions about the
I
work
ask you a
that they
question, maybe
produce.
take things in a totally different direction, and I'm hoping that either of you might remember what it was that we talked about. But we had this one of the questions I was thinking about is last time we talked, kind of a week or so ago, civil discourse came up,
Mm,
and I think Peter that you'd mentioned that there was something that you'd been doing in your class or in around civil discourse that looked
yeah.
really interesting to me, and I kind of want to get back to that if you recall.
January 6th, how I teach
That's what it was,
January
yeah,
6th.
and I'm just kind of fascinated by what went on there and not what went on in
Yeah.
Gen 6. I think I know, but like how did that kind of play out or what happened in your classroom as a result of
Yeah.
that? How did you kind of adjust lessons and what does that sentence say about civil discourse, AI's place with it or role in civil discourse? I'm just kind of fascinated by that as a topic.
uh, well, one of the major news publications reached out to me recently. They wanted to know how I was planning to teach what happened on the Capitol steps. And the reason they did that is because a day after what happened on the Capitol steps, I decided to blog on how I'm going to teach this thing. And and they had read that. And so the answer was that I want to simply share with the students some resource that explain what happened as best I can. Here's what happened. And then, because it's a history class, and it takes place in January, is say, look, we've already covered something called Bacon's Rebellion or Shays' Rebellion, and we've looked at this insurrection and that revolt. Historians attach words to describe these events. So, what word, if you're a historian, would you attach to this? Is it an insurrection? Is it a rebellion? Is it a revolt? My goodness gracious, we declare this thing the Boston Tea Party. Why was it not the Boston Tea Revolt or insurrection or riot or whatever word you want? These words conjure up something, and so that was the exercise, and I wrote about that, and revealed that 40% of my students that last year and certainly next year and again this year because I just did it, they just don't want to venture into a discussion of that. They're really reluctant to say anything. I give them the opportunity. I have no opinion or I decline to state, one or the other. I don't know or I decline to state. In my government class this year, because of AI, I kicked it up a notch, and I had the ChatGPT produced for me a pardon, a presidential pardon. Write up for me a presidential pardon, and give me 2 or 3 reasons, why you're pardoning. Not that a president has to do that, but I wanted it. And so out comes this very official looking document, and I put it in front of the kids, and I say, all right, if you were president, would you sign this thing? Would you sign this thing? And then again, with AI, once that's done, let's now go to this new platform that now is a year old called Class Companion, instant feedback on your writing, the one that you'd mentioned that I'm associated with. So that's all out there. I'm an actual employee of Class Companion. I run their community outreach. I'm their community outreach manager. But let's go to Class Companion, and now you're going to write an essay that's going to be scored with the rubric that I've put in there. And the essay is going to be this response to this question about, whether or not a president should pardon. What is a pardon? Can you name a few famous pardons? I want you to write about that. And the AI is going to provide instant feedback on that essay, 30, 40 minutes, something like that in class. But so that's to answer your question, how I do it.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, I've asked large groups of teachers what they're doing, and what I've learned, and it's really interesting, about 40%, maybe even more than that, of the teachers that I've heard from, they're not going to teach it. The best they're going to do is say, incidentally, I'll bring it up incidentally, which I'm not even sure what that means.
To be clear, you're saying they're not going to teach AI or January 6th?
What happened on the Capitol steps? Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. They're going to leave that alone, and I will also share with you that what, according to the most recent Walton Family Trust survey, Walton Family does really good work on this. It's only about 60% of all teachers who are using AI for class-related purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not with any intent to throw anybody under the bus, but I think there are only 2 teachers at my school right now that are openly saying that they're using AI, and you're talking to one of them.
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I know we have a colleague who, and I'm going to keep it really brief because I don't want to speak for him. It's just things that I've heard that he's used it for, or used AI to help students kind of generate letters to Congress people, which I thought was a novel sort of approach. They had to rework and revise what have you, but I thought that was kind of a clever way to kind of lean on that how, like, what's the format? How do you kind of cultivate your message so it sounds sophisticated, or at least informed and intelligible. And I thought that was kind of a clever way to kind of develop a sense of, I guess, civic duty, if you will, via AI. But
I was thinking with the presidential pardon output output for that prompt, and I'm thinking about, like, the kids kind of seeing that and looking at it, and it looks very official. It sounds official, right? I was thinking about how the kids today are more so in a world where you don't know what the facts are, because I was talking to my students this past couple of weeks, like, videos can now be, like, really faked, like, more so than they could be in the day. Photographs, images, easy. Stories. Matter of fact, I think now on Google, its way it indexes, like, some of the images it brings up are real people are AI generated ones, because it indexes through popularity, and click and links to it. And so that means that the source we go to find out information might now be pulling up corrupted information, which puts them in a real, I mean, if you're a kid and even an adult right now, like, you don't even know if you don't know. Right. And so I think that the pardon is like another example of, like, we can create something that looks really official really fast.
Mhm.
And then now how quickly can it be disseminated?
Mhm.
So, I mean, what's your take on, I guess I'm thinking about, like, to what extent do we have to is it necessary for kids to use these tools to know what they can do so they know what they're looking at?
Sorry, what?
In other words, like, do
Yeah.
they have to understand these systems well enough so they can be skeptical?
Oh my gosh, tough question. I mean, if I were growing up today, I'd be skeptical of everything and everyone. I mean, how do you trust anything today? I don't know. I mean, it's a great question.
Well, that seems to get into the just kind of, I guess I'm thinking philosophically in the terms of, like, how do you teach that? But then also, it's one thing to be skeptical, but then how do you help temper it so students don't become cynical?
That's
Um,
it.
Right.
Yeah.
and because I think that's essential. I mean, I think that I've been through my own cynical years before, but I think that's kind of an easy way out. I think that it's not. I think anybody can be cynical. I don't think. I think it's kind of lazy at the end of the day. And I'm saying that as somebody who I think used to be pretty cynical about things, but and I think it allows people to kind of just get off the hook, so to speak. It's like, no, let's engage and try to make sense of it and realize that things are just complex and hard, and that's just kind of the deal with life. But you could be skeptical, but still have kind of either faith or trust in either certain people close to you or humanity at large, or I don't know, or, the sun's going to come up tomorrow, kind of thing. I mean, there are ways you can still kind of I think temper that, but.
Okay, I want to ask the two of you a question here. It's not directly related to AI, but it is to this question of teaching civil discourse, or how do you teach controversial topics. As a Lang and a Lit teacher, do you share your politics, your personal views on I mean, periodically I'm sure it comes up, doesn't it? And then I'm sure you ask your students, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Do you ever share your own views?
I'll absolutely answer that. I'm happy to.
Go for it, Pat.
If Mike wants, I was going to see if you want to go first, but
no, I went first last time.
Yeah, fair enough. I know there are definitely some teachers in our building that are very open about that. To me, and I'm conflicted because as a public school teacher, I don't think it's my place to necessarily profess my views. It's not. I think we're in a unique position where, I guess I take seriously my job is not for them to know or particularly care what my personal views are, but to just learn how to think. And so for years, I always kind of taken the tact. It's like, I don't necessarily care too much about what you think. I just want to know how you think and how you get to where you're going with your thoughts, and how do we kind of cultivate that sensibility. But when it comes to controversial issues, because I don't shy away from them. I went a book that I've taught for years, with the exception of this semester for whatever reason, actually mainly time. I've always loved the autobiography of Malcolm X. And so you're dealing with a whole slew of issues, and not just race, right? But there's class, right? There's religion, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there. And what I found is really helpful is to approach difficult topics, whether it's that or say like LGBTQ issues these days, which is another realm that I like to kind of jump into, if only because I want students to recognize, and I want to reinforce too, that I recognize that we all have blind spots, that we all have limitations, and I'll help illustrate that for them in a variety of different sort of contexts and ways. So like a simple way would be to use, any sort of kind of visual illusion that you can find. So a one that I've used for years, this is this great guy. Actually, I think you get a kick out of him. There's this conceptual artist up in Seattle named Chris Jordan. And there's this activity where I'll have students, half the class leave the classroom or stand in the hall for a short time. And I'll have an image up on the screen, and it'll look like the one that I picked from his, because he does all this cool artwork, it'll look like the moon, right? And I'll have students write down all the details they can, and they'll go ahead and just jot that down. I'll say, okay, now tell me what you just saw, and they'll tell me. And I'm like, got it. And so I'll write it down, and then I'll have the two groups switch. And so the group on the inside will go outside, and the outside group will come inside, and I will change the picture, and it'll be a different image. And in this case, this particular image, it looks like a bunch of credit cards with all these kind of other sort of colors and what have you in there. And then I'll have them all, and I'll of course ask them, well, what do you guys to see? I'll write it all down, and then I'll have them come back in. And then I'll have the students, kind of swap notes, and I'll say, well, what's interesting is you guys actually both saw the same thing. And they're like, what are you talking about? And it's really just a lesson on perspective, because what Chris Jordan has done is, if you look at his website, I think it's just chrisjordan.com or something, but he's got two series. They're both called like Running the Numbers, and there's like 1 and 2. But if you click on the image, it'll zoom in and it'll zoom out. And so what that's helping students understand is you can look at things from a very kind of limited point of view, and that's fine. And there's going to be a certain level of truth to that. But if you zoom out, you're going to have a whole different sense of reality. And both are important. And it's not that one is necessarily better or more important or greater than the other. It's just that you're coming at it from different angles, and they both have some amount of value. The question is, what do you do once you have that all information? Now, what do you think? And so, whether you're looking at something visual like that, or if you're looking at a political opinion, or you're looking at, your ideas on God or whatever, like that's all that we're trying to get you to do, is to think critically about like, what's the information, what's the evidence before you, and are there any limits here to what you're thinking about, right? And so I open it from that perspective, because if you're talking about, say, the gender spectrum, some students are going to be very firm, like it's either male, female. Right? And others are going to say, well, I think it's a little more complicated than that. And I'm like, okay, well, here's what science is saying these days, right? It's more nuanced. And so that just allows them to say, I'm not asking you to have a quote right answer. I don't even know what that necessarily even means, I want you to start thinking about how complex and challenging these things are. And let's just kind of give each other some space to kind of like, put an idea out there and see if it sticks. And if it doesn't, then you adjust it. No big deal. And so there's more to it than that. But and so I bring in resources about perspective a lot, and blind spots, and kind of use that as a foundation to say, this is just being human, right? This is just something that we do for life, right? So whether you have a position now and it changes 10 years down the road, okay, whatever, and whether we agree or not, that's kind of not even the point. It doesn't even really matter if we agree or not, because that'll help us kind of challenge our own kind of perceptions and maybe help us grow a little bit.
Well, and having said that, I really should. I have a good friend who says, be careful not to sound like a cheerleader for AI, and hopefully there are no cheerleaders listening and take offense to that. But but always say, and it's really true because it's in my brain. It's always true. This is what I think, and this is what I believe when it comes to this topic right now. Right now, okay. There's certain things that have held consistent. One is this need to focus less on the product and more about questions related to the product. But on a number of other levels, the thinking has changed. What I thought about 6 months ago, I've let go. An entire bit of work for how to prepare students for the AP exam. I went down that path, and I just realized, oh my goodness gracious, let that go. So somebody asked me about it. I say, yeah, I've still got those blog posts up there, but I'm not thrilled about them anymore. Just let them go.
Yeah. That's a good lesson too, just by itself. Like just learning how to let go of stuff that we hold on to, and that's fine. That means you're growing and changing and evolving yourself. I mean, I don't think there's really any much more that we would need to ask of our students. Just do that, right?
And I know you guys wanted to ask me questions, but now I got to ask one more. Okay. So that big Atlantic Monthly article, the death of the essay. Do you know which one I'm referencing here?
I think I read it in a long time. I read it like last winter.
I did too.
Yeah. They're just. I'm trying to remember exactly what their whole.
There is a lot of
College essay is dead. That one. That's from last
AI Doom essays.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, like, I think it depends on where you are with how much you've kind of played around with AI. Like, because I know in November of 22, I got hip to Chat GPT and started using it. And I was like, I don't have a job anymore.
Oh, wow.
And then I used it more and more, and I was like, oh, yes, I do.
Oh, good.
Right. But and some other people went kind of through the same thing as they're like, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to do? And now my job has become like kind of reinvigorated because I'm like, what do I do with this? So going back to Pat's point, like there's always going to be a reason to have like an essay constructed by a human. I mean, maybe it'll be like going out for a nice dinner where you have a little tiny food, in 7 courses. Because you want that experience, and then you go home and you turn on terrible AI generated like action thriller movie with, all that because, you want to relax and escape.
So you've found a place for your teaching as we move into the future. It's not the doom and gloom. And Pat, same kind of thing, or are you saying, oh my gosh, the clock is ticking?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely challenged. I think it's a provocative title. And when I think,
yes, I agree.
I think about, in years past when I'm thinking about that old song, "Video Killed the Radio Star," or just anybody saying, "Oh, radio's dead." It's like, no, it's very much alive. It's just not as pronounced maybe as it was in culture, in previous generations. And so, I think the essay will endure. The question is like, how does it endure, and in what way or ways do we want to use it? Do we use it differently? Do we focus, to our point before, more on the process and a little bit less on the product? Which I think would be probably a welcomed sort of development. But essays in and themselves, I think that I've actually had trouble with the way that we teach essays, period, because I think it's highly limited, and I think it's specific it's just a specific kind of essay, and I don't think it necessarily lends itself to developing good writers. I think that it's if you look at, say, any sort of essay on, gosh, maybe even your blogs. I mean, those are essays. Right. But they're not formulaic, right? Not this 5-paragraph nonsense that are just regurgitated year in and year out. That essays are really just about trying a thought or an idea and running with it and see if it holds up or not. That's all that it is. I don't think that ever goes away, because that's what part of what makes us human is we're like, hey, I got this thought. I'm just gonna put it on the page and see if it seems to stick. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, revise it, and then what do you do with it? And that's, I don't think that ever will go away. So the idea that, I think maybe the college essay as it is perceived might go away, and I'm fine with that. But I think writing for clarifying your ideas, I think writing for putting ideas, just new ideas out there, I think is always going to be relevant regardless of the time period. And it might just adjust in terms of how much it's used or leveraged, but I think there will always be some amount of space for it. As that regards, it's kind of like vinyl. It's kind of like, some of these other sort of, I guess, things that we find in other fields that maybe we think have gone away. It's like, no, they're still there. They're just maybe not as seemingly significant as maybe they once were.
I heard Mike say, correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, that you're feeling reinvigorated. Is that right?
I like having problems to work on.
Pat, are you feeling reinvigorated in your teaching, right? I am, for sure. I'm feeling like
now. In fact, Mike and I talked about this like a year ago before we even started the podcast, that AI, I think, probably saved my career in terms of just wanting to stay in the game, because I was I was just so ground down, and I'm like, and it was such a game changer that it shifted I think just what's even possible. And it's not to say that I'm not a cheerleader in the sense it's the be all and end all. I am very cognizant of the problems with it, and we need to talk about those things and confront them. But at the same time, it just opens up so many interesting, kind of compelling sort of avenues that I think are really worth discussing, at least trying to kind of like, think through. And I think education just needs some major upgrades just in general. We've done things in a pretty stale sort of way, and it just doesn't connect as well. Some might argue it never connected, but I think that AI gives us an opportunity to find new ways to connect with students and help them grow and learn as people. And I think that's excellent. Like, what else would you want? That's our whole deal. So
on this score, it sounds like all three of us are on the same page.
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we haven't had like no, last week we kind of had someone that was kind of like not so impressed by AI, but or not so like interested, I guess. With that said, though, Peter, I know that you work with Class Companion. You want to do a quick shout out to them and what that program does before we close out the show?
Well, I think I mentioned somewhat already, but it launched about a year ago. It's celebrating its first year of existence next week. And what is Class Companion? It's helps teachers assess students' writing by way of instant feedback. That's the big thing. And students, when you give them an opportunity to respond to whatever questions you want to put up there, they stay engaged, and that's the amazing thing. So for me personally, I'm in a block schedule, and ideally in a block, every 40, 50 minutes or so, you really should, not that I do, but you really should try to assess students' content knowledge. And short answer question, put it up there on Class Companion. They'll stay engaged 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. It's a powerful tool. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's one I've not checked out, but I want to.
Is that free, by the way, Peter, for our
It is
listeners?
free. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So we will link that in our show notes as usual. And educators may want to check out Class Companion. Peter, thanks you so much for coming on the show. There's more I want to talk about. Maybe we can have you back at some point.
I'd love to. It's good chatting with you guys. I mean, we had a great connection, I thought, when we first met here a week or so ago. I'd like to continue. Sure.
Yeah. So we'll have you back on maybe season 3. Pat wants to close off season 2. I'm thinking that the name of the show may have to be like this is what I know now.
Yeah,
right. Because with that statement you made about like, well, this is what I think now, or here's what I believe now.
Right now. Yeah.
That is like education and AI land, especially. So I guess this is what we know now. This is the Bot Brothers AI for Educators. I'm Mike Pearson.
I'm Pat Burns.
And if you enjoyed the show, please like it, share it, let people know about it. You can contact Pat on Facebook or Bot Brothers on Twitter. I'm sure Peter's I think you got a Twitter account too. You can contact him. Check out his blog that we'll link. Again, share the show. We love doing it. We love hearing from people. If you know anyone that wants to come on the show, please have them email us. All right, take it easy.